Welcome to the Cardfellas Podcast Show with Matt. I'm Chris. And today we're going to be talking about a pretty big vintage card, and it's a card that, from the time that I grew up, it was always kind of the thing. It was a holy grail type of card, like the Honus Wagner. 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle SGC 9.5, just sold for $12.6 million.
Congratulations on your new purchase, Chris. Let me be the first to out you as the buyer.
Yeah, well, if I could do that, I wouldn't be doing this show.
This would be the labor of love. And
okay.
Yes, right.
Yes,
yeah, I have a hard time spending.
I would probably be doing a lot of loving and a lot of laboring, but wouldn't have anything to do with this show.
I have a hard time spending $12 on a card right now. So, I'm not spending 12.6 on a card.
Right.
But yeah, what a week for the hobby. And this one is right there at as you said, it's the top of the hobby. This is the Grail, and the most expensive trading card ever. Yeah. And now it takes the top spot from the Honus Wagner card, which you mentioned, which was always considered the Holy Grail. And it's not the scarcity of this card. You and I have talked about, scarcity driving prices, but what really drove this price was the eye appeal. Yeah. And, the idea that a card from 1952, not just any card, Mickey Mantle's rookie card number 311 in the set is going for that much money because it's 9.5 and it just looks just absolutely stunning. And, this was a reminder that not only the card business is still booming, but people are treating these cards, these high-end, super high-end cards, like fine pieces of art, because that's what they are. I mean, this is just another indication of how people are collecting these high-end cards. They're treating it like fine art.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be one of these things, and I don't know. I always see it in science fiction movies where you see these kind of relics of pop culture, and you kind of wonder like what this thing's future is going to be, and if people are still going to be interested in it. But maybe that's something that we thought, 30 years ago too, and clearly they are still very interested in it. And like you said, we're at a spot right now that there's a lot of people out there kind of putting doom and gloom on this hobby, but we're not really seeing that. We're not seeing it with the high end. And you and I were talking earlier that, things seem to be selling pretty briskly for us. And I mean, there's lots of different places. We've seen kind of some card shows out there recently and videos and photos from those places. And they're very busy. And I think really, we kind of went through this lull, but it may have been largely just due to it being summertime. And that's something that we normally see every year, is just this kind of summertime lull. People get busy. They're doing other things, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this fall and winter go.
I think the hobby's here to stay. Absolutely. And I think, stories like this really bring it back to light, and it brings it to an audience that's maybe a casual audience. A couple people referenced this sale to me, knowing that I'm into cards. They're not into cards. Maybe they were at one point, but, they were like, hey, do you have any of those cards? I'm like, yeah, I do. I have 3 of them. It's just,
Right.
just they're joking, but, they know that I'm interested in cards. It gets the hobby in the news, and it just keeps it relevant. And, I don't think it has any, I think the only thing that slowed down is the ridiculous prices that things were going for. I think things have stabilized. I think buyers are still buying. They're looking for cards that they want. And, this is a really good example of that. Somebody really wanted this card. When it went to auction, it actually went into extended time. So the auction time ran out and there were still bidders. So they continued to go. And that made like an extra $4 million for the buyer. And, when we look at kind of the last 12 months of, even you can go back 12 to 24 months of cards, we've set records. We've seen all of these records broken. We had the Honus Wagner card sold earlier this month for around, almost $8 million. So that set a record. You also had another Honus Wagner last year sell for $6.6 million. And then you had last year a different Mantle card graded PSA 9 sold for $5.2 million. And then there's the LeBron James rookie patch autograph that sold for 5.2. You have the triple logo man that sold for multi-million dollars. So you're starting to see, this is becoming normal. The only thing that made this one unique, and the reason we're talking about it, is the $12.6 million price tag, which blew those other ones out the window. But you're seeing multi-million dollar sales. And for people who are casual on the outside, we see this a lot. You see some cards selling for thousands of dollars for guys who have yet to establish themselves as a professional commodity. When I say professional commodity, professional sports commodity, the Trey Lances, the Mac Jones, the Trevor Lawrences, those type of cards, those are, those rare cards that are the rookie patch autos that are numbered. They're selling for tremendous. So there's a lot of value and there's a lot of money being exchanged here for these cards. So again, it goes back to where's the hobby? I think it's there. I think it's really in those, the speculative market's still there, but people are buying those ultra rare cards and they're paying a premium to get there.
Yeah. I think maybe some of these things we're seeing with this cool down is, a lot of people have been getting their PSA slabs back in the last 6 months and hoping to get the money that these things were selling for a year earlier. And that's not happening. And I think maybe that's where some of the doom and gloom is coming from. But I'll tell you one thing that I've been seeing, I don't shop in the $10.2 or $12.6 million neighborhood as far as vintage graded stuff. But vintage graded stuff right now is selling for really good money, and it's selling very briskly. So that's something to look at. And it kind of brings up something else I wanted to talk about with this is that, this was a SGC 9.5. There are 3 PSA 10s on this card as well. One of them is held by a Colorado attorney. The other one's held this card was on display at the National. The managing partner for the Arizona Diamondbacks owns one of these cards. But so this SGC sold, or 9.5 sold for 12.6. What do you think a PSA 10 would sell for?
I would say it's going to sell for more. I just think PSA has more of that cachet. I think that I would put it in the 15-16 range. That's just my opinion. I think it goes for more. I will say that this SGC 5 or 9.5 really does have amazing eye appeal. And, I think some people like looking at it in that tuxedo. So, but I mean, tried and true PSA cards hold more value than any other grading company, period. And so I would look at it if I'm looking at it from that perspective, if I had, $10 to $15 million and I was looking to buy this card, I'm buying this in PSA 10. And I'm gonna go over that 12.6. So if somebody in the next couple months here decides to put their PSA 10 up, I would say it goes for more than what we just saw.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. A lot of vintage collectors really like SGC. They want that tuxedo
That's
look.
true.
But, I also think the number 10 just looks nicer on a slab than a number 9.5. And again, that's one of those things that I've struggled with a little bit with setting things to SGC is that, they have that 9.5 there, and so many cards get that 9.5 label because they're stingy with the 10. And that's like, I really like to set it to PSA just because it's a 9 or a 10. You don't have that 9.5 that kind of ends up being a mushy middle spot. Just give me a 9 or a 10 and let's get it over with, and that doesn't seem to be the case with SGC. And for me, as someone who wants to get some resale value out of my stuff, that's a little bit of a roadblock for sending stuff to SGC. So right,
and like you said, we're not dealing in the same trade as the the 52 mantle that looks like this. But it was an interesting decision by this person. And going through the history of this card, and I got this from ESPN, so I consider ESPN a reputable source. So the history of this card is pretty cool. Alan Rosen, better known as Mr. Mint, who's like the iconic card guy, he bought this card from a guy named Ted Lodge. Now Lodge found this card at his home, which he inherited from his father. Now the story goes, Lodge's father had reportedly been a truck driver for a toy distributor, and he ran Topps products around the United States. And in the 50s, apparently there was some distribution issues with this set, and Topps kind of bungled it. So this guy had a bunch of these sets sitting at his house for years and years and years, things he hadn't delivered. And so eventually he passed away. His son inherited the house, like I said. And then he finds these cards, and then Alan Rosen finds out that he has these cards sitting at his house. So he contacts him, and somebody contacts Alan Rosen and says, "Hey, my friend has all these cards." Alan Rosen brings a check for $125,000 worth of cash or money, whatever he brought, and he bought like 5,500 of these cards from Lodge's son. And in that pile of 500 or 5,500 cards, there was some like 70 some mantles. Yeah. And included in that was one of these mantles. And you have to remember, these cards sat in like the pristine boxes. So they hadn't been handled, they hadn't been touched. They were in the distribution boxes, so they were untouched. So it was basically like finding a buried treasure that hadn't been looked at or touched. And so, when you think about it, Rosen got these for $125,000. And so of those, fast forward to 1991, Rosen sold one of those ungraded mantles for $50,000. And he sold it to a guy named Anthony Giordano. And that's where this mantle came from. It was one of those cards that Rosen decided to sell, and Giordano bought this one in 91 for $50,000. Now, the question that you and I were talking about, Chris, is we don't really know. I don't know. I haven't read much about who Giordano was. I don't know why he didn't get it graded. I don't know if he was a big card guy at the time, but this card just recently got graded by SGC. So that's what really put the value on the card. When you look at it, it had the strong eye appeal. But that was I found that interesting that, that's how the story of this card came. And I think what was more interesting, Chris, that you and I talked about was, the cost of these cards was next to nothing. I mean, $50,000 back then, that was a lot of money. I get it. And, $125,000 for cards at the time, that's a lot of money. But gosh, look what these guys flipped this money for, or flipped these cards for. And, that investment sure paid off. And so I just found that to be an interesting story about the card. And, I don't know who bought it. I don't think that's come out yet. I don't know who spent the 12.6 to buy it. And I don't know if we will. But I did read some speculation that said if this person who bought it for 12.6 wanted to sell it right now, they might fetch 14 for it. I'm like, well, didn't it just sell? But they kind of set the market, and that's right. And if somebody wants it that badly, maybe they're going to give them an extra couple $1 million to take it off their hands. But again, maybe we'll find out one day who paid up the 12.6 to get it. But pretty cool story.
Yeah, maybe they'll just send it in the mail for a crossover and go for a PSA 10.
Yeah, why not? Let's do that. Just send it in the mail. And that's, and I was thinking about that too. Like, could you imagine cracking this card? like how nervous, like you'd have to get the best like surgeon in the world with the steadiest hands, or something to do that. Like, oh gosh, you can just imagine. I get like, a little bit tense when I'm cracking $100 card, let alone a $12 million card. But I don't think this one's going to get cracked. I think this one will stay in its tuxedo for a while, unless somebody has the balls to break it open and send it over to PSA. But and that's one of the things too. I was going to say, one of the interesting things, one of the PSA 10s that I saw of this card had an old had the old label, or it looked like the computer etching, which I think I don't like that. I would, but then I thought about it. I'm like, you're not cracking that. Right. You're not cracking that for an updated slab, that's for sure. So you just kind of have to deal with it.
Yeah. I just watched the video that you put out. Go get myself some Snipper, some Ace hardware, and rock it out.
Easy to do. When the card is $50 less. But you and I talked about this, Chris, though. Like, okay, so what does this mean for the hobby? And we've kind of talked a little bit about this throughout the show, but it's good PR, right? It's good PR for the hobby. It keeps the topic relevant. I think cards are continuing to go up in price, especially the super rare ones. And when I say keep going up, we're not going to keep seeing cards breaking these records. I think the ceiling is close for most of this was the holy grail. I think a PSA 10 might be the record setter. I think people with money, this is the other thing, I think people with money are investing in cards still. I think, when we kind of got back into it, there was like the Gary V's of the world, and there were other guys and, sports card collector guy that are going out there and buying these expensive cards and putting it in their vaults and saying, this is part of my retirement. And I think that's a growing trend. I think more people with money are looking at, like I said at the beginning, they're looking at this like art, and so when you're looking at, a Monet or a Da Vinci, I'm not an art guy. So when people, have those pieces of art, they want those for their, their own ego and their attention. And for somebody to be able to pull out a mantle and go, hey, look at this card. I'm only, this is one of the, that means something for people with money. Not that I know what that feels like, but I know what it feels like to show off a cool card, right? Like that's one of the things that people like to do. And then, lastly, I think, the last thing is, I think sports cards are a legitimate investment. I think that's the way it's being looked at. And as far as what does it mean for other collectors who don't have the deep pockets, I think, a strategy is find the cards that, and we talk about this all the time, have low population. Look for cards that have low population. Look for cards that are, of players who are high in demand that maybe don't have the tons and tons of PSA 10s. Focus on those because I think those will always be in demand.
Well, very good stuff. I think we can put a bow on this. Appreciate you coming on for the show here, and appreciate everyone listening and watching. We will talk to you on the next show.